Okay, so get this. We've got federal judges uh, publicly pushing back against presidential pardons.
Yeah, you don't see that every day.
And we're talking federal judges. This is not some small potatoes thing, right?
Hmm.
And it's all tied back to these January 6th Capitol riot convictions.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating situation. What's so interesting here is that these judges, the very judges who presided over these cases, are expressing like deep frustration.
Yeah.
They're even using their dismissal orders to voice their disapproval.
I'm a little puzzled by that. I'm not a legal expert, obviously, but isn't there some kind of code of conduct that usually prevents judges from just, like, openly criticizing rulings or actions?
You're right, there is, but they've kind of found a way to get creative within those constraints.
Okay.
They're using these written orders that they have to file to dismiss the cases, and they're using that as a platform to really lay out their concerns.
So instead of just signing off on the pardon and moving on, they're using these dismissals to actually make a statement.
Exactly. It's definitely a way to make their opinions known. So, for example, Judge Tanya Chutkan, she sentenced a lot of these defendants.
Right.
Dozens of them. And in one of her dismissal orders, she wrote, no pardon can change the tragic truth of what happened on January 6, 2021. It cannot whitewash the blood, feces, and terror that the mob left in its wake.
Wow, that's pretty blunt. You don't really see that kind of language in legal documents very often, do you?
Not often, no. It's definitely unusual.
So she's clearly making a point.
And we see the same kind of strong message, maybe not in those exact words, but in a similar vein from Judge Beryl Howell. She stated in one of her orders, no national injustice occurred here. Charges were fully supported by evidence. This court cannot let stand the revisionist myth relayed in this presidential pronouncement.
Okay, so we're starting to see a pattern here. All three judges, using slightly different language, are essentially conveying the same message, like the facts are the facts and a pardon doesn't erase what happened.
Exactly. It's important to remember that these judges were deeply, deeply involved in these cases. They heard all the evidence, presided over the trials, saw the sentencing hearings, all of it firsthand. They're pushing back against any narrative that tries to downplay the gravity of January 6th.
It makes me think that it almost feels personal for them. You know what I mean? It's like they're actually defending the integrity of the legal process.
I think that's a really astute observation. Yeah, they're not just talking about, abstract legal principles here. They're reacting to a situation that they experience very, very closely.
And it seems like a big part of this is this idea of a false narrative being pushed about what really happened on January 6th. That comes up a lot in the source material we've been looking at.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And Judge Colleen Collar-Cotelli, she had something to say about this too, right?
She did. She emphasized that the court records, they tell a very, very clear and undeniable story about what happened that day, regardless of how it's being portrayed by, well, those who receive pardons.
It's like she's saying, the evidence is right there. You can't just wave a pardon and make it disappear.
It is very much that kind of feeling, yeah. It all ties back to these efforts to change how the public understands January 6th.
You mean these attempts to portray it as like a peaceful protest or even a beautiful day when it was very clearly anything but based on, everything we've seen.
Exactly. And these judges, they saw firsthand the evidence, they heard the testimonies, and they're pushing back against that. They're saying, hold on a second, the facts here actually matter.
And what happened that day really matters.
Right. And that leads into another point that the source material highlights. The judges are deeply concerned that some of these pardoned individuals could reoffend.
That's a pretty scary thought.
It is, especially since some of them haven't shown remorse, haven't apologized.
Wow.
And some have even, hinted at wanting retribution.
Wait, hold on. Did any of them actually say they wanted retribution? Because that's really alarming.
There have been statements made that raise serious concerns about future violence.
Okay, so that makes the judge's anxieties about recidivism even more understandable. It's not just about the past. It's about what this could mean for the future.
Absolutely.
Now, something else I've been hearing about that I wanted to ask you about, this whole without prejudice dismissal thing. Some of these cases were dismissed without prejudice. What does that actually mean? Legally speaking, could these charges be filed again later on?
So technically speaking, yeah, without prejudice means that the government could theoretically bring those charges again. However, realistically, in this particular context, that's highly unlikely.
So are you saying these judges, knowing they probably can't refile these charges, use this without prejudice dismissal as a way to make a statement, like a symbolic gesture?
That's a possible interpretation. It seems like they wanted to make their disapproval crystal clear.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong message.
It really speaks volumes about how deeply they're concerned about this whole situation.
Okay, so we've got judges pushing back against pardons, worries about a distorted narrative surrounding January 6th, and then these very real anxieties about potential future threats. But listening to all of this, you have to wonder how much pressure these judges are under. How do they balance, their oath to uphold the law with all the political realities of the world we live in?
That is a crucial point that you've brought up. We live in a time where trust in institutions is declining, right?
Right.
And the judiciary is not immune to that. So this entire situation really raises questions about the judiciary being perceived as just another political branch.
And if that's true, how can it effectively act as a check on the other branches of government? That's supposed to be one of the cornerstones of our democracy, right?
You're absolutely right. It is. It's fundamental. Judges take an oath to uphold the Constitution and the law, not to bend to political pressure.
So how do we protect that?
Judicial independence. That's what's supposed to safeguard us against things like the tyranny of the majority or executive overreach.
So are these judges pushing back like this because they feel like that independence is actually under threat?
It's certainly a valid way to interpret what's happening. These judges are drawing a line and saying, look, we're going to uphold the rule of law even if it's unpopular or inconvenient.
And it highlights this real tension, right, between the executive branch's power to pardon and the judicial branch's duty to uphold the law.
Exactly. It reminds us that pursuing justice isn't always simple, especially not in a politically charged environment. It's worth thinking about, what kind of message these pardons send.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
If people are pardoned for doing things that directly threatened, like the peaceful transfer of power,
Right.
what does that tell people? What precedent does that set?
That's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It feels like we're in some pretty uncharted territory here. Because on the one hand, you could say, well, pardons are about mercy, about second chances.
Yeah.
But if these pardons are seen as actually, undermining the rule of law itself, doesn't that set a really dangerous precedent?
Yeah, it really does. And that's what makes the judges' responses here so important.
Okay.
They're not just, airing personal grievances or something.
Yeah.
They're defending the integrity of the entire judicial system.
I'm starting to understand that, yeah. It's like if people start to believe that certain people are above the law,
Right.
or that, political connections can get you off the hook, then the whole system starts to lose its credibility.
Exactly. And that's where, we get back to judicial independence.
Right.
Judges need to be able to make decisions based only on the law and the evidence without being worried about what politicians will think,
But it feels like, especially these days, that independence is always under some kind of pressure.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Like there are always forces trying to push the courts in one direction or another.
There have been more and more efforts lately to politicize the judiciary, to question whether judges are legitimate, and to stack the courts with people who have certain ideologies.
So in that kind of environment, these judges pushing back against these pardons, that's even more significant.
Oh, for sure. They're drawing a line and basically saying, we're not just a rubber stamp for whatever the executive branch wants. We're here to uphold the Constitution, to uphold the law, even when it's not popular or convenient.
It's a reminder, isn't it,
Okay.
that we can't just take these, democratic norms for granted.
Right.
We have to actually protect them, defend them.
And that brings us back to the citizens. We can't afford to be passive. We need to be informed, we need to be engaged, and ready to actually speak up for judicial independence and for the rule of law.
Okay, so let's get really practical here. What can, normal people do to actually support judicial independence? Because it feels like such a big, complicated issue, a systemic issue almost.
It's a big issue, yes, but there are concrete steps that everyone can take. First and foremost, just educate yourself.
Right.
Learn about how the judiciary works, what judges do, why their independence is important. And luckily, there are so many great resources available, a lot of them online.
Yeah, like you mentioned earlier, the American Bar Association, the Brennan Center for Justice.
Exactly. They have a ton of great information, and they explain these really complicated issues in a way that's easy to understand.
So once you understand it yourself,
Yeah.
then you can start talking about it.
Right. Tell your friends and family, your community.
To raise awareness, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
The more people who understand this stuff, the more they'll be inclined to actually want to support the judiciary.
Right.
And you can go beyond just conversations. You can get involved in actual advocacy work.
Oh, okay.
You can support organizations that are defending judicial independence, that are working for a fair and impartial system.
So donating to these organizations, volunteering your time, maybe even contacting your elected officials to say you support certain policies.
Exactly, exactly. Every little bit helps, and it's not just about some abstract theory.
Right.
This is about protecting everyone's basic rights and freedoms.
Because a fair and impartial judiciary, that's what makes sure that everybody's treated equally under the law, no matter who they are or what they believe.
Absolutely.
It protects minorities, it holds powerful people accountable,
Right, it's the foundation.
and it upholds those basic principles of democracy that we all rely on.
It's worth fighting for. We have to constantly be vigilant, be willing to engage.
So far, we've been talking about the judiciary as this separate, independent branch of government.
Uh-huh.
But it's not really separate, is it? It's always interacting with the other branches.
That's true.
And those interactions are influenced by, the overall political climate.
You're raising a really important point, yeah. The judiciary doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Its ability to function, it's tied to how healthy our democracy is overall.
So if we're seeing more and more political polarization, if people are trusting institutions less and less, if people are trying to delegitimize how we vote, all of that impacts the courts too.
Absolutely. The judiciary needs people to trust it. If people don't believe the courts are legitimate, judges can't really do their jobs effectively.
That makes sense. So it's not enough to just try to strengthen the judiciary.
Yes.
We have to address these bigger societal issues, right?
We do.
Heal our divisions, rebuild trust, reaffirm our commitment to, democratic values.
I totally agree. The health of our judiciary is inseparable from the health of our democracy.
If we want a fair and impartial justice system, we have to work toward a political climate where people value truth, reason, respect the rule of law.
That's really what it comes down to. That's a key takeaway for our listeners today.
Okay.
We've been talking about the challenges, the importance of independence.
Yeah.
But it's not enough to just understand it all. We need to act.
What you're saying is knowledge without action is basically meaningless.
Exactly. I'm challenging every single person listening right now to take at least one concrete step
Okay.
to support judicial independence and the rule of law.
It could be as simple as reading an article, talking to a friend about these issues, donating to one of those organizations we mentioned.
Even small actions can add up to something bigger,
Yeah.
We can make a difference if we work together.
Don't underestimate your power.
That's right.
Your voice matters.
Yeah.
Your actions matter.
Yeah.
Get involved, stay engaged, and, be the change you want to see.
As we're wrapping up here, it's interesting to think about this whole thing in a historical context.
Yeah, like how the framers of the Constitution thought about this.
Exactly. They really understood how important it was to have a separate judiciary, an independent one.
Right.
And they knew that if judges were constantly being swayed by political pressure, the whole system of checks and balances, it would just fall apart.
It wouldn't work.
It wouldn't work at all. So they put a lot of thought into how to protect the courts from outside influence.
Right, like lifetime appointments, protected salaries, all those things designed to make sure judges could rule fairly based on the law.
Exactly. Not based on whether they were afraid of losing their jobs or, facing retaliation.
So that structure has worked pretty well, right? For all these centuries.
Yeah, it's held up pretty well. But it's not perfect, is it?
No system is?
It kind of relies on everybody understanding the importance of these principles, actually upholding them.
Because there's always that temptation, isn't there?
Yeah.
To try to influence the courts for your own political gain.
Absolutely. And we've seen it from, both sides of the political spectrum.
Right, this isn't about defending one party or one ideology.
It's not. It's about the bigger picture, the principle.
Yeah.
We need a neutral judiciary that applies the law fairly, equally,
To everybody.
no matter who's involved.
Because at the end of the day, that's what protects all of us.
Yeah.
The rule of law. Doesn't matter what you believe, what your background is.
It makes sure everyone is treated fairly, makes sure our rights are protected.
And if that principle gets weakened, if people stop believing in that,
yeah, then the foundation of our whole society, it starts to crumble.
so what can we do to make sure the judiciary stays strong, stays independent? We've talked about what citizens can do, but are there any bigger changes, system-wide changes that could help? Like things that would make the courts more resistant to this political pressure?
That's a great question. There have been a lot of reform ideas floating around for years.
Like what? What kind of things are people talking about?
Well, some experts say we need to look at how we select judges.
Okay.
They argue that the current system is just way too politicized.
Right. There's been so much debate about that, especially when it comes to the Supreme Court.
And that's a really valid point, especially in recent years. Another idea that's been proposed is term limits for federal judges.
Oh, interesting.
So instead of lifetime appointments,
Yeah.
maybe there are set terms.
Yeah.
And that could make each appointment, a little less intense, a little less high stakes.
Yeah, maybe it wouldn't be such a huge political battle every time.
Right. And another idea is simply increasing funding for the judiciary, making sure the courts have all the resources they need to actually function properly.
And to do it independently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because if courts are underfunded, if they're overworked.
Yeah, they're more vulnerable to outside influence then.
That's right. So there are lots of things we could explore.
Right.
But any changes that we make, they have to be made really carefully. We can't lose sight of those core values.
Judicial independence, impartiality.
Exactly.
And that brings us right back to why it's so important for citizens to be informed, to be engaged.
Absolutely.
We need to understand these issues. We need to know what's at stake. And we need to be part of this conversation about how to reform the system.
Because ultimately, the future of the judiciary, it's in our hands.
That's a powerful thought.
We're the ones who are responsible for making sure that the courts remain a symbol of justice, that they can protect us against tyranny.
So let's not take our judicial system for granted, right? Let's learn about it. Let's talk about it. Let's advocate for policies that actually strengthen the rule of law and that protect the court's independence.
Because a fair and impartial system,
That's essential.
absolutely essential for any democracy to thrive.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for this really insightful conversation.
Of course, it's been my pleasure.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, we have.
We've really dug deep into the complexities of judicial independence.
We've talked about the challenges that are out there.
And I think we've made it clear how important it is for everyone listening to play a role in protecting this, cornerstone of our democracy.
It's not just up to the judges, it's up to all of us.
If you're listening out there, we hope this deep dive has maybe sparked your curiosity
Yeah.
and inspired you to maybe explore these issues a little bit more on your own.
Deep learning.
Remember, the pursuit of justice, it's a journey.
It's not a destination.
It's something we're all on together.
And we all have to work to keep those scales balanced, keep things fair.
Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay engaged.